Hey, this is Chris Jones with Sewing Clover Photography, hoping to make several instructional videos on how to become a good or even great photographer. In this first video, I just want to cover what are the elements that make up a great photograph. I know you've seen thousands of photos in your life, and you can probably intuit what a good photo is, but are you able to recognize the actual elements that make that photo great? So we're going to go over 10 and maybe a couple bonus elements that make up a great photograph. All right, the first thing I want to cover is exposure. And by exposure, I just mean how much light is coming into your camera. If you have too much light coming into your camera, then the whites and the highlights in your photograph are gonna be blown out, meaning there's not gonna be any detail, you won't have any information in the photo. And on the other side, if you do not have enough light coming into the camera, then your shadows and your blacks are going to be too dark, which means you're not gonna have information for that part of the photo in your camera. So it's very important that whatever the subject of your photograph is, has the correct amount of exposure. And we can just see here, just scrolling through, that these photos seem to have pretty good exposure. The things that are important to the photograph, the subjects that I want highlighted, have the correct amount of light on them. The second element to a good photograph is that it's got to be sharp and in focus. So if you look at this photo here of this groom behind the bride, now the whole photo is not sharp, and I didn't want the whole photo sharp, but what I did want sharp was the groom, and you can see that he is. And now if he was out of focus and the bride was out of focus, then there wouldn't be much to this photograph to look at. So every photo needs to have, whatever your specific subject matter is, it needs to be in focus. All right, the third element to a great photo is it needs to have good composition. By composition, I just mean it needs to be interesting when you're looking at it. The elements in it should all tie together to create an overall feel for the photo. So some things that help good composition are framing. If you look at this photo here of this bride, this was actually at a farm, and I just had the bride and bridesmaids all walking towards the camera, and I intentionally pulled them under this tree limb so that the limbs up here and even the grass below it all sort of framed them in to the photograph. This example here of a bride in this bathroom, I was in the bathroom with her and realized if I stepped out of the bathroom and just opened the door halfway, I could frame her through the doorway. And lastly, talking about framing and composition, this kid was playing around this tree, so I asked him to jump up and hold this limb. And I could have moved the camera left or right, but I put it exactly where I did because I wanted these two trees behind him to kind of frame him in so that he's in the middle. Like if he was his body was covering one of these trees, then the photo might feel off balance. But the way it is currently, you can feel 1/3 of the photos here, 1/3 of the photos in the middle with him in it, and then the last third of the photo is out here. And then something that I'm pretty particular on, I'm a little OCD on, is I really want photos to be level. And so the horizon line to kind of be straight across and things in the back to be perpendicular. Maybe a good example of that would be even this photo here, right? So this reflecting pool, I made sure this line is completely level all the way across. When photos aren't, it gives me a little bit of an uncomfortable feeling. Unless it's perhaps like dancing or some sort of party, and then if the photo ends up being crooked, that's fine. The next thing we're gonna talk about is good lighting. Your photographs need to be well lit. So in this one, I actually had to use a flash because I was in a bathroom that didn't have good window light, but you can just see that the bride and the bridesmaids all have evenly lit light on their skin and their dresses, so it makes them pop a little because there's no weird shadows. It fits well. Another example of this would be this bride. This was an Airbnb. A tip that you can use is that north-facing windows have the best light coming into buildings. So if you're shooting inside and you don't know where to shoot, let's say it's raining outside, try to get your subjects and put them next to or adjacent to a north-facing window. So the window is actually on the left side of her, and I had her stand against this wallpaper. Same thing here with this bride and groom. We've got a window behind me with nice soft light coming in, and it's highlighting the bride and groom. It's not overly harsh, so they're not squinting too much. They're just relaxed, but it's well lit. Number 5, your photos need to convey some type of emotion. So this photo here, bride and groom kissing, flower girls kind of joyfully laughing, screaming. I didn't take this during the ceremony. This was actually afterwards. I asked the bridal party and the flower girls to pick up a bunch of flowers and just throw them in the air when the bride and groom kissed. I think it conveys just like a sweet, joyful feeling. This photo here has some emotion of maybe peace or tranquility. This photo is taken actually right after sunset, so there's barely any light left, and I just had the bride turn her face towards the remaining sunlight, and she actually tilted her head down and positioned her hands by herself. But it conveys that feeling of just peace. And then this last photo here with the bride and groom in the snow, in the sun, in the field. I think even though it's cold outside, it still conveys this feeling of warmth because of the way they're connected. Number 6, unique perspective. Most of our lives we walk around and we see everything at eye level, right? It's just I'm walking and this is the viewpoint, everywhere I see. And when we take photos, we can do that. But also if we can get over things or under things or beside things, that creates a different feel for the viewer who's used to walking around and seeing everything in normal life. For instance, this photo of this groom, I had the groomsmen hold him over top of me. I'm laying on the ground here and just asked them to throw him up. Or in this photo of the groom jumping by the bride, I was kind of laying down in the snow shooting up on her, and I asked him to kind of just jump back and forth. A perspective that I think is really important when photographing kids is to get down on their level. So you can see in this photo here, I put these children on these steps near the altar where this bride and groom were getting married, and then I crouched down and shot on their level. When we take photos of kids, if we shoot down on them, like if we're standing up and we're shooting down, it just doesn't convey the authenticity of the child to me. So I think it's a really good rule when you're photographing kids to crouch down, or even sometimes you can get below and shoot up on them. It just gives them a more powerful, dignifying look. All right, the next thing I'd like to chat about is how good photographs tell a story. So here we've got this best man, noted by the BM on his suspenders, just being hoisted in the air at this reception. So the story is there's just a party happening, right? But there's a lot of different expressions between the different people's faces. This guy's lost his nice collared shirt. People are screaming and cheering. It's fun. This photograph here, this bride had just put her dress on for the first time and walked out, and her mom and dad are seeing her. And just the story is the emotion that the mom and dad have on their faces. I mean, his dad's just so sweet and enamored with his daughter. Just a really cute photo. The next thing I'd like to chat about is contrasting subject matter. So when there's kind of things that are opposites in a photo, I think it creates a nice pull-push dynamic in the photo. This photo here of this groom who's dressed in military personnel. You know, military represents something strong and forceful and stern, and then you got these bubbles which are really playful. So I think it's a fun dynamic going on here. Another example of that would be the push-pull of light versus shadows in this photograph. You know, so it's all light behind this makeup artist, and she's completely silhouetted. You can't really see any details in her face. But then over here you've got the dark behind this bridesmaid, I think, and then you've got the light that sort of silhouettes her face. So it's kind of that push-pull dynamic going on. Let's talk a little bit about keeping your photographs clean and paying attention to detail. So everything in your photograph should be there on purpose. You don't want any trash on counters, you don't want clutter on floors. You want to really pay attention to the lines, the framing of your photograph. Everything in that should be intentional. When we look at this photograph of this bride, we got her standing in these azalea bushes, and then we shot up at an angle to get the flowers, which are white, with her dress, which is white. And then you can see behind her these trees. They're all vertical, but none of them are growing out of her head. I find it really troublesome sometimes and frustrating when there's a subject in focus, but then the background behind them is distracting, or it like kind of smashes them into the background. So with this, we put a tree on each side of her head to make sure she's the main focus. Here's another photo that I think is worth looking at the detail. I was really intentional to make sure that this ring was all pointed straight up. It's not an angle, so all the lines in this photo are intentional. The way the shoes, they're not quite touching, they're a little bit separated. These little vines that I just pulled out of the ground outside of this wedding venue, I laid them over to kind of give some flow. You can see some of them are not in focus, and then they come up and they're in focus. That's all intentional. Or even with this bride, she had a low-cut wedding dress, and she had this little jewelry in her hairpiece. So I just wanted to kind of highlight her back and her neck, and so I just told her to hold her hair up like she's doing, and then I put this big bush behind her. So she's in the middle of the center of it, basically. If I had her over here to the side, then half the bush would come out of her head and half of it would be sky. But as it is, it's really clean. There's nothing very distracting in this photo. All right, so far we've covered 10 elements that can make up a great photograph. Let's look at 2 more, which we'll call bonuses, because why not? The first one is movement. This bridal party, I asked them to dance. I had a Bluetooth speaker on. I put on some sort of hip hop song probably, and then they just started busting it out. This groom really took off out front, and I think it created a pretty fun photo. This photo here, I asked the groom to just pick up his bride and sort of shake her back and forth, and it creates this fun feeling, and it's authentic, you know, it's not posed. I mean, that's her real reaction to being shaken by her groom. Okay, we've made it to the last thing I want to talk about today, which is shooting off of things or shooting through things. Specifically in this context, I want to talk about shooting through windows or through glass and shooting off of mirrors for reflections. You can see in this photograph, this bride and groom are in a bar, and this is a big mirror up on the wall, and I had them look into the mirror, and I just kind of took a photo into the mirror, which is pointing back at them. And I think it adds a fun element with this. You know, it's just not quite clear exactly. There's some patina maybe on the glass, and you got the bartender, but the reflection's kind of fun. In this photo, I'm actually outside a giant window where I have the groom, this fellow, and his groomsmen inside the window. And I'm shooting up at an angle, and I'm getting all these clouds in the sky, but I'm also capturing the groom and groomsmen inside. So it's kind of a pro level tip. If you start shooting off of things for reflections through windows, you're really gonna push yourself to a new level of creativity. All right, that's it. That's 12 things you can take with you to help you make better photographs. You don't have to incorporate all 12 of those in every photograph you make, but the more the better. Thanks for hanging out with me. Hope you learned a little bit. Peace.